Okay, so before we get started on actually sewing the coasters, I wanted to talk to you just a real briefly about what inspired me to actually make these coasters. So a couple of years back, when we were shop hopping, we went to a place called Boxcar Quilts, and they were selling these little kits that says they're called Meowgical Nights. They have the little kitty on them. And now these are, they call it a mug rug set, but it's more like a pot holder. It's big like a pot holder, and it has these cute little kitties, cute little kitty in the middle of it, which I really love that cute little kitty. But it's more of a pot holder size. Now I have made these in the bigger size, but for today we're going to focus on making the coaster size ones. And these are a really good project because it teaches you foundation paper piecing. Now, foundation paper piecing allows you to get those sharper corners. This is an economy block. It is really a super beginner friendly way to start paper piecing. It's not super duper complicated. So, and it was easy to scan that economy block in there and make smaller ones to use for the coasters. So let's get started on this project. So let's go over what you need for this project. The most important part is you need your pattern, you need your economy block for the paper piecing. And you need, you don't even need a yard, not even, well, maybe a fat quarter of backing material. You're going to need some batting material for the inside of the mug rug, and literally you are going to need a pile of scraps to do this. Now the pattern that I was using did call for, you can pre-cut the squares to make it a lot easier to sew, and I will show you how to do that. But if you have one, you also you need to add a quarter. Now this little ruler is an amazing tool. It has a beveled edge that helps you cut those seams perfectly down to a quarter of an inch, which is why they call it an add a quarter ruler. So, but if you don't have one of those, you can also use your standard ruler, and I will show you how to do that as well. So let's get started on the cutting for this coaster set. This is a great scrap buster project because you need one 3x3 square for the center, two 3x3 squares for the outside square, and two 2.5-inch squares for the inside square, because basically this is a square within a square within a square. So we're going to start with the center square, and you're just going to do 3 inches by 3 inches, and I am going to try to center it on this pumpkin in the middle as much as I can. So and when you do that, that process is called fussy cutting. So you want to fussy cut your square out of your fabric. So there's my center square. It's not precisely centered, but that's okay. These do not have to be perfect. There is a lot of forgiveness in making coasters. As long as part of that shows through the middle, it's gonna look awesome. Next we're gonna do the outside because it's a little bit easier. So these are already 3 inches wide. So I just need to square them down to 3 inches. And so here is our two 3 by 3 inch squares for the outside square. Now I ran out of the little polka dots, so this one is basically just for demonstration purposes. So you want to go 2.5 by 2.5. Okay. And that has some selvage ends on it. We don't want the selvage ends. So you're just going to cut two squares that are 2.5 by 2.5. Alright, you can move all your scraps out of the way. And to finish these up, you've got to make the triangles. So I'm going to match them up corner to corner. And then we're going to cut these on the diagonal. And the same with our outside. Cut them on the diagonal. Just like that. And that's going to make our outside square. This is going to make our inside square. And this is going to make the middle square. And so that's how you get the fabric prepared for the paper piecing. Now some people don't even do this. They just grab squares big enough to fit the part on the paper piecing and just go to town with it. I prefer to cut them down a little bit, makes them a little bit more manageable. So the last cut that you need, and I'm not going to demonstrate that because it's pretty straightforward, you need a piece of that backing fabric that's 4.5 by 4.5 inches. So there are two schools of thought on paper piecing. One of them is that you sew directly on these lines and then peel the paper off when you're finished. And the other way is you just fold the fabric and sew by the fold. I'm going to show you both ways, but in this first piece, we're going to do it the traditional way. Now, it's easier to do this if you have a light box. I do not have a light box, so I'm just going to hold it up in the air and try to center that pumpkin so there is a 1/4 inch fabric. You want to put this wrong sides to wrong sides, but this square needs to be centered on this square as much as possible, so there's a 1/4 inch of fabric around each of these lines. So to get started on actually sewing it, you need to bend this, pre-fold the paper just like this. Pre-folding it makes it a lot easier when you go to trim it with the add a 1/4 ruler. Okay, I've already done that. Now, if you don't have an outer quarter, you can use a regular ruler. It's not going to create quite as good a seam. But it can get you started, and then you can lay it flat. So it's possible, but you want to fold all the folds on all 4 sides first. Alright, since I'm going to do this traditional, I am going to pin this. Now you can also use fabric glue and glue it together, but I don't particularly like to use the fabric glue. So I'm going to pin it. Remember that it's wrong sides to wrong sides, and then center it on that square, and then pin it in place. So it looks something like this. Now this is going to hold that square in place so it doesn't move while we're sewing it. And so to start sewing, and here's where the outer quarter comes in very handy. You are going to fold this over. Well, I didn't center that very good on the square. Let me try that again. Okay, so once you have it pinned in place, here's where that outer quarter is going to come into play. Now, if you will notice, these are numbered. The center square is 1. This triangle is 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. That is your sew order. So we're going to start with 2 right there. So to do that, we're going to fold this over just like this. You're going to take your outer quarter. Now this lip right here will butt up right against this the paper, and then you take your rotary cutter and just cut it right there, and what you're left with is a perfect 1/4 inch, just like this. So now the next step, and here's where we're actually going to start sewing. The next step is you're going to put these right sides together and just center one of the little inside square pieces, or the inside square fabrics right there. And I am just going to hold this in place, but like I said, you can use fabric glue or pins for this. But now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to sew right down this line. Okay, so I have used a color coordinated thread. I'm going to use black. I've set my stitch length to 2.5, and I have made sure that my triangle is centered on the back with this center square. And now I'm going to turn it around, and I am going to slide this underneath the foot and align so that first stitch is going to be right there on that corner. And then I'm just gonna, let me bring the camera down so I can show you. I'm going to sew all the way down to this corner and stop at that corner. And then I'm gonna stop and cut my threads. And now we're gonna go over to the cutting mat and cut this down. Okay, now, so to use this add a quarter ruler to help you trim, it has that beveled edge, and hopefully you can see that. You have the beveled edge right there. So you're going to fold back your paper just like this. Then you're going to line that beveled edge up with the edge of your paper. Now if there was fabric for you to trim, you would be able to see it, and then you would take your rotary cutter and just trim that extra fabric right away. And what you're left with is that perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance right there. So now that we've done that, we're going to repeat that sewing process around all 4 of these corners. And so you're just going to follow it in line of the sewing instructions. So this one was 2, now we're going to do 3, and then 4, and then 5. But in between 2 and 3, we are going to take time to press this, and I will show you that once I have that sewn. Okay, so when you sew that second side, the first thing we're going to do is use that. This time I'm going to use the plain ruler to show you how to do it. So you're going to just line the edge of the paper up with your 1/4 inch on your ruler, and then just cut it this way. And so you can use either or to do this. So once you've trimmed the extra fabric off, you're going to come over here to your ironing board, and I'm just going to finger press these backwards to start off with. And then once you have them finger pressed, then you can take your iron and iron them flat. So the back side is going to look something like that when you're finished. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish the other 2 sides, and then I'll meet you back here at the cutting table to see what we need to do next. Okay, so once you've got all 4 sides sewn, you're going to flip it over, and like we did before, we're going to finger press this down, and then we're going to iron it in place. Now, unfortunately, when I sewed this, I wasn't paying that close of attention, and this one right here is just a little bit small. I'm going to try to make this work, and if it doesn't, I'll have to pull it out and do it over again. Just make sure that you're leaving a 1/4 inch past the triangle right there, so you don't have this problem. So now that we have this, all this side, all these 4 sides, now we are going to start working on the outside. Now, when we're sewing these, it's really important that you gotta sew past these lines right here and these lines right here. But on these over here, you don't sew past the line. So you have to be really careful when you're doing this, so you don't sew past that line on these two sides, but always sew past that line on the other two sides. So let me take you down to the sewing machine so I can show you a little bit better. Okay, and so we're going to start on 6 and 7. So these are the lines, just sew from one corner to the other corner. Don't sew past, you just go from one corner to the other corner. So and now I'm going to line this up and center it as best I can. And then I'm going to start right there in the corner. And then sew all the way down. Stop right there at that corner. Cut my threads. And then I'm going to do the other side the same way. Okay, now we're going to go back down to the sewing mat so we can have a closer look at this. Okay, so once you have both sides on, it should look something like this. So the first step is going to be to fold that edge back and use your add a quarter ruler to trim these edges off. And then the next step is you're going to take it to your ironing mat and finger press these open first. On both sides. And then you're going to press them with your iron. So when you're done, your back side is going to look something like this, and this is your front side. Alright, so now we're going to work on these two sides right here. So I'm just going to turn this way, and then I'm going to center that as best I can. Where that point is basically in the middle. And then I'm going to turn this around, and I'm not sure, no, it won't. Okay, let me bring this up. So the sew line starts way back here at the edge of the paper. So I'm going to start way back on the edge, and I'm going to sew all the way around, and then I'm going to go off the paper on the other side. So let me do that right fast. Make sure it's still in place. Alright, and now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to center that where the point is right in the middle. And then sew from edge to edge. Alrighty. Now that we're done and it looks like this, we're going to take this over to our pressing mat. Okay, for this part, I wanted, okay, so for this part, I wanted to bring you down a little bit closer, because when I took this off the sewing machine and turned it over, this little side right here didn't really sew too very well. So the whole piece, it is going to be a little bit wonky, but we do have to trim it. So the last two steps to this part of the process, it is to turn these corners back and trim these with your outer quarter ruler, which I have already done that, and I've already pressed these. And so the next step would naturally be to trim along all these cut lines on the back of the pattern and then pull off the paper. So I'm going to do that right now. Okay, so the next step is going to be to, the lines are very narrow. But we're going to trim along those lines where it says trim along those lines. If you trim on the inside, so hard to see with the camera. If you trim on this line, on the inner line, it's going to cut off your points. The points right here. And you don't want to cut off the points. So I'm going to turn this around. And I'm going to trim this down. Now, once you have trimmed it, now we're going to take the paper off. So you just pull the paper off, and when you sew it, it kind of perforates the paper. So it should come off fairly easy. But you have to be careful not to pull out your stitches like I just did there. So I'm going to have to fix that one. But anyway, you just continue that process until you've taken all of the paper off the back. Okay, so once you have the paper off, it should look something like this. I did fix those stitches. Now on this side, this seam right here, it is not ideal, and it's not not perfect. It's going to be hidden inside the seam line when we make the coaster part, so I'm not going to try to pull it out and redo it. It just should be a quarter inch, and this point should be more visible, and it's just not. So when you are doing your paper piecing, be very careful of the placement and pin it if you have to, keep it in place, because when it does shift, it does not make those perfect points like you really want them to be. This is still usable, and I'm still gonna make it into a coaster, but it is just be aware. Okay, so now we're gonna work on the non-traditional paper piecing where you don't actually sew on the paper. For this, you're going to need some fabric glue and or a pin, straight pin. I'm actually going to do both. And of course you need your center square to start off with. So I'm going to fold this, turn this upside down, and I am going to put some of this glue where this is going to lay. And I just did put this up in the air so I can make sure that it's good. And that glue holds this center square in place, because we're going to need that. And I did forget to pre-bend these, so I'm going to go ahead and do that right fast. So you want to just pre-fold those. Makes it a lot easier. And if I had pre-folded them, it would have been a little bit more easier to tell where I needed to put my glue. So, but right now, it's all good. Alright. Now I've got those all pre-folded. I've got my center square. Oops, look at that. It shifted, so that glue did not hold that in place. So I'm going to turn that straighter. Why didn't that glue hold? Wasn't that special? I'm going to put some more. This is creation in real time, y'all. Alright, let me try that again. Center that right there. Alright, now that we've got everything pre-folded, it's time to go over to the sewing machine so I can show you what to do next. Okay, just to make this a little bit easier on myself, I have pre-trimmed these edges. And just like on the regular traditional paper piecing, you are going to start with number 2. The center square is 1. You're going to start with number 2. But in this case, you're just going to fold the paper down, just like that. And then center your triangle right there in the middle, just like that. And then instead of sewing on the paper, you're just going to sew along that edge of the paper, just like this. And then you're going to turn it around and do the same thing on the other side. And you've got to put them right sides together and just center that triangle just like that. And my needle is in the way, or my straight pin is in the way. So I have to get that out of the way. And we're just going to sew it just right along the edge of that paper, just like that. And then, like before, if you're just using scraps, you would go over and cut your edges with your add a quarter ruler. I pre-cut a lot of this, so the edges, it's already a quarter of an inch, and so all I would need to do at this point is press these open, just like this, and then start on the other side. So you would just press them open. And then you would start on your other side. And you're going to do the other two inside corners and all of the outside just like that, where you just fold this paper over and sew along the edge of the paper. So this is what it looks like when you have all four pieces of the inner square in place. So now we're going to work on that outer square, and we're going to start with 6 and then go to 7. So just like before, we're going to fold that corner over and put these pieces right sides together and center them. Like this. And look what it looks like on the other side. Looking good. Okay. Cutting fairly even. And now we're just gonna take and sew right along the edge of that paper. Okay, and then do the same thing on the other side. Okay, now we're going to take this over to the ironing board and iron it. So the dangers of using scrap fabric for some of this is sometimes you have to improvise. I ran out of this, so I had to sew 2 pieces of scraps together to make these last 2 corners for this. It should not be noticeable once it's all sewn together, but like our other corners, we're just going to center that right in the middle. And then we're just going to sew right along that line. Alright. And now we're going to do the same thing on this side. Just take that little triangle and center it right there. And flip it over. And then bend that fabric, or bend that paper over. And sew right along the edge of that paper. Alright, so now let's take this over to the cutting knife. Like the ones that came before it, we are going to press that open. Just like this on both sides. And again, the imperfections in these, so we're gonna, next step, despite the imperfections, we are going to trim this up, and should be able to trim it right even with those edges, because I cut this one tighter. And then from here, I've already taken the pin out of the middle. From here, you can just peel that paper off, and then you can reuse this one for your next project. Although, that said, for my next project, I don't think I'm going to go quite this small. Just because they only end up about 4 inches square once we have them all sewn together into the coasters. So now we are actually going to do the sandwich to create the coaster. So you want to leave your coaster, leave the top right side up, and put your backing down. If you can tell if there's a difference between your front and back. This fabric, you can't tell which is the front and which is the back. They're virtually identical. So this one is not very square, so I am going to square that up and go ahead and cut that off. So once you have the backing down, then you're going to put your piece of batting down. Now make sure that your batting is on the outside. Don't sandwich it in between, because when we turn this right side out, if you sandwich it in between, it's going to end up on the outside of the coaster, and we don't want that. So make sure your layers are outside, backing, and then batting. So once you have your layers set, you can clip these if you want to. And we're going to sew all along these edges 1/4 of an inch, but we're going to leave an opening on the bottom at least an inch, inch and a half, to give us room, maybe 2 inches, to give us room to flip these out. So I'm going to go take it to the sewing machine and sew one of these so you can see. Pin these in place if you want to. These are small enough. I don't think I need to pin them in place, but I am going to flip it over with the batting side down, and then I'm going to start just after that point on that one side. I'm going to use the edge of my pressure foot as a guide and keep it flush with the edge of the coaster. And then I'm going to move my needle over to where it's 1/4 of an inch from that edge, roughly 1/4 of an inch. And you want to back stitch here, because that seam is going to take some pressure. You get to 1/4 of an inch from that corner. You're just lift your presser foot, pivot, and go down the other side. Now, when you get back down to the edge where you first started, you're just going to go right about there and then back stitch. So you can leave that opening. So when you're done, it's going to look like this. This is what the back side looks like. Now we're going to take this over to the cutting table and turn it right side out. Okay, so this is your sewn one. Now you're just going to clip the corners to make those corners just a little bit more flush or pointy, however you want to say it. Do that to all 4 corners. Trim your threads off. Make sure you didn't miss any seams. Everything looks good. And then you're just gonna pull these apart. Poke your finger into the opening to hold it open, and then take one of the opposite corners and just poke it through that hole like that. Alright, so that's what it looks like right now. And now you're going to take your point turner, or in my case I'm using a stick, and you're going to press out those corners to make them sharper. Just be gentle so you don't push through your seams. And once you're satisfied with your corners, and make sure that we're going to press this so the opening seam lies flat, and then we're going to sew 1/8 of an inch all the way around the edges to close this opening and give it a nice finish. Now if you want to quilt these on stitch in the ditch on these, you can. I am not going to. I'm just going to do that outside edges. So I will meet you back at the sewing machine to do that. Okay, so I am going to start just above that opening, and I'm going to use my presser foot as a guide, and I have moved my needle all the way over to the right. So now I'm just going to sew that 1/8 of an inch. You get to the corner, just pivot. And when you get back to the end, just double back stitch, so you can set that thread. And then just trim all your threads off. And there you go. There is your coaster. That's what the back side looks like. Now if you want to, you can use coordinating thread on the back. I forgot to do that, so I had to sew them all the same. And so there is your coaster. Okay, so this little project turned out to be a little bit more challenging than I really wanted it to be. And so when I copied this, when I copied the economy block and made it smaller on my computer, I didn't make it square, so they ended up like 4 1/4 by 4 1/2 inches. The papers it did. So by the time I finished sewing, they ended up 4 1/4 by 4 1/2 instead of being a square. So, it's not that noticeable of a difference. Oops, upside down. But I would make sure that if I do this again with an economy block, that I make sure they're square before I print them off. And the other thing of it is, I haven't done coasters in a while, so the first coaster I made, I sewed it where the batting ended up on the outside. When you're sewing with scraps and you have 0 margin for error, that is kind of bad news, because I almost lost this entire project. However, everything ended well, and these turned out fabulous. It did, you know, you do lose the points on them when you turn them inside out, but they are still adorable, and I still like the way they turned out. So I am really pleased with the results of this project. And these are going in my Halloween drop. There's a set of 4 coasters, so I'm really excited about this. That drop will come September 1st, 2026. If you're watching this sometime in the future, this drop has already happened. But as of right now, I am really excited. That Halloween drop will be September 1st. I'm looking forward to showing you a preview of all of those. But for this little project, because it's a good beginner project for paper piecing, I did want to share the process of making these coasters. So I thank you so very much for watching, and I hope you will stay tuned to the channel and watch my next video. And as always, thank you for watching.